Hey, welcome to Creative Block. We're your hosts, Gene.
And Vee, we interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam.
We asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they want us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts.
And today with us, we have Taylor Reynolds. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
We did that in perfect unison, V. That was that was amazing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We've done a lot of these. Taylor, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are a friend of ours. You work in animation. You've done all kinds of things, all kinds of amazing, impressive things. You have many interesting interests. And so I'm very excited to have you on. For those who don't know you, tell us who you are and what you do.
I am a animator, illustrator person, mostly been working in animation, but I love to draw and make illustrations too. The past few years I've been working in games. Previously just worked on a project for Radiohead, and then before that a interactive series about a pop band forming in LA called We Are OFK, which is coming out this summer, I think.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's a lot of really like different, interesting projects too. That's very nice resume.
And it's the thread so far, at least, has kind of been like the music industry has been somehow attached to it. Which is interesting.
Yeah. When did you first realize that you liked doing creative things, and like what kind of drew you to it?
I mean, I think I was one of those, like, drew a lot when I was a kid. I would get in trouble for, like, during reading time, I'd have a book with like animals on it on my desk, but then in my lap I'd have my sketchbook and I'd be doing studies of it, like in second grade. So just loved I loved drawing and writing a lot too. I used to like write a lot of stories and poetry and all of those things, and it was just like always a constant through like school and high school, and then I was really just planning on being an English major, just kind of pursuing more of the writing side of stuff, until my senior year. I came across an animation program, or like a digital arts program, that was left some room for, it didn't necessarily have to be just animation. It could also be modeling, or just, it was a little more open. And I had never really thought about that before, working in animation. And so that was kind of an exciting thought. Ended up going to that program and getting to meet a lot of really cool creatives through it, and learned a lot. But it's I don't think I spent my whole life thinking drawing was going to be my career, or that art was going to be my career. It was just always something I did.
Was there anything you wanted to, like, as time went on, was there something that you did kind of figure out, like, oh, I'm more interested in this, or is that still kind of an ongoing process?
It feels like it's still ongoing. Like, every year of college, what I wanted to do changed, which was kind of interesting that, the program did kind of accommodate for that to an extent. It was like my freshman year, I was like, I want to do art direction, and then the next year I want to do character design, and then sculpting, and then I really actually thought that I didn't like animating, and then I started animating for my senior thesis and was actually like, oh, this is pretty fun.
You made a whole film, like a short film.
Which was wild, and really rewarding. But that's kind of how I found out that I liked animation. I thought there was something satisfying about doing 3D animation. And that was kind of my springboard going into the first job I got when I graduated, which was doing 3D animation for a VFX studio.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Did you start doing animation in 3D as opposed to like 2D, I guess?
Our first like classes, like our intro to animating class, was 2D, but it was like very, very rudimentary. And kind of, I mean, meant for complete beginners, which I absolutely was. So I never got like I never got really good at 2D animating.
It's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
It's a whole other thing. Yeah. It still interests me sometimes to maybe revisit, you know, now that I'm not in college and stuff. But yeah, I had a really amazing 3D animation professor, Ruth Daly. Shout out. She's amazing.
Shout out.
She worked on Life of Pi and just a lot of other really impressive creature animation. She worked on the creature animation in the original Golden Compass movie. Yeah, so and she was like just very, I think one of my favorite professors I had, as far as just like very meticulous like feedback, and I learned a lot from her. And then when I did my senior film, she gave me a nice compliment on it, which was just that all the animation looked cohesive together and it looked like my animation.
Nice.
Which I was happy about, because getting that done, my mentality was just kind of good enough, you know, for each one. It was like it couldn't be perfection. It just needed to be completed so I could move on to the next thing. So
yeah. There's one thing that I really respect about everything that you do, is that it always feels like it's coming from you. Like it feels like you really know what it is you want to be producing, but you also change like the way you approach different drawings, different projects. Like there's always a difference in approach, but there's still a cohesiveness. And I'm wondering, like, where do you sort of draw your influences from, your inspirations? Because I know you have a lot of faves, and I know you love talking about your faves.
my faves.
Let's hear about those faves.
Yeah, one of the problems I have with listing stuff out is that my autistic brain craves a complete list, and I get weird. I get weird
That's
about,
a loaded question.
No, it's just I get weird about like not. I'm like, I'm gonna miss something, and it's totally fine to miss something. But that's, you know, when people are like, what are your top 5 movies? For some reason, my brain will always like omit one of them that's really important. But I digress. Yeah, I think growing up, my biggest inspiration was probably, you know, alongside with watching animated films and stuff, was a lot of like illustrated books and picture books and chapter books.
Yeah.
I was just always like, I really wanted to be like a novelist when I was younger, and I've always really had a love for book covers, and I've actually kind of reignited an interest in just kind of collecting some children's books and like illustrated books. Yeah, so like that would be one major one that I'm also kind of like leaning back into now, or it's been cool to kind of revisit some of the picture books I remember as kids, but then also just like finding new ones. And
yeah, I was gonna ask, so it's like it's not just stuff you remember, it's also finding new gems.
Yeah. And also because some good friends of ours had a daughter recently, and I'm preemptively excited to be able to like bond over those with her. So
Totally.
Yeah,
that's really cute.
Yeah, so and I never really had like I never took like a art history class or anything. So I feel like I've been kind of like figuring out later on what I'm drawn to, or like, oh yes, this is what this artist is really cool. I'm going to go look them up more, which the freedom of that has been nice, and that's why I started that whole thread of just like artists that I've found through this kind of later journey of looking through art history and stuff, and just like finding those influences and then studying them. So I have a lot of like illustrative influences, a lot of like Russian ones actually, that I've been collecting, like Russian children books, or like illustrated books. And then probably in like high school and college, my biggest inspiration was Studio Ghibli for sure. I was also very into anime at the time. was watching a lot of that stuff. But I loved Spirited Away growing up. My best friend and I used to just put that movie on and paint together, which was always
That sounds
fun.
nice.
It's very
That sounds pleasant. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was like, wait, there's more. When I was in high school, and I watched Princess Mononoke for the first time, and that was kind of the one that I was like, I want to see everything else that the studio has done. And so senior year of high school, I acquired every single Ghibli film and watched all of them, and kind of focused on learning a lot about that. I was just very taken by them and the imaginativeness. I feel like there's still kind of that like childhood optimism is kind of a thread there too, between like the children's books and some of their more like imaginative and optimistic films. But then also like, you know, Princess Mononoke was so like brutal. And that also really interested me, that like, oh, you know, that there can also be in this film that's got these, you know, charming little forest spirits and other things, that there can also be like this brutality,
horrible violence.
Yes, yeah. And it's not really happening like as a backdrop like Howl's Moving Castle. It's like, oh, yeah, dude just got his arm shot off, you know, like that's pretty awesome. So those were probably my biggest inspirations kind of growing up. I watched a lot of SpongeBob.
Oh, that's good too.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, and I am biased, but I wanted to ask you about the Russian cartoons and books, because for those who don't know, I am Russian, and I grew up with a lot of that stuff. And I was curious, what is it about those that draws you to it? Because they do have a unique style. There's something about it that really is different than a lot of other cultures, like children's media. But yeah, what is it about it that draws you to it?
I honestly am still trying to figure some of it out, but I think it's the combination of like, it's always very like pastoral, so there's a lot of like nature elements, or just like these beautiful natural scenes. A lot of times like folk tales about like animals. So like there's one I can't remember the name of, but it's like my favorite illustrations of a fox in anything. They're just very, very good. And then also like the ornament, I would say, like there's in the clothes, or even just like in the embellishment around the pages and things like that. There's very a lot ornate. Of times this very pretty like kind of framing ornamentation or just like decorative design that is,
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, is super pretty. And I also think just like traditional like Russian or Slavic like folk dress is really gorgeous. And so whenever I see characters with that in these books too, it's just like it's already just kind of like vibrant and different. Yeah, I take some of that stuff for granted because it's just like what I knew, and so I'm always fascinated with people that come to it, you know, from the Western side of things and like discover it, because to me I take it for granted, but there's a lot of really good stuff, and there's a lot of obscure works of art that have gone totally unnoticed by the West. And like animation wise, you know, a lot of people know Hedgehog and the Fog, which is great. But there was so much animation coming out of the Soviet Union because it was government funded, and there was like two studios. I think it was literally like two studios, maybe. Yeah.
Were they trying to compete with Hollywood? Was that kind of like during the
because there was an Iron Curtain. They didn't give a shit. It was just.
I was wondering if it was like a thing. I was wondering if it was a thing, like, you know, kind of like we gotta go to space first. We gotta show how good, you know. I was wondering if like culture kind of came, because I remember as a kid I was watching do you know that cartoon with the wolf and the little rabbit?
Oh yeah, No Pagadim, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that cartoon so much. As a child, it's so good.
The opposite direction, where because they didn't export any of that. That was not an export. Like nobody outside of the Soviet Union, as far as I know, this is all, take it with a grain of salt because I don't know shit. But as far as I know, none of it was exported. It's just we need to entertain our fucking children, and we don't want them to see horrible Western media that'll brainwash them into loving America. And so they just did their own versions of things so much. Like Nupagadi is totally just like, what if we did Tom and Jerry?
Yeah. I think, but they're so cute. The designs are
It's great.
very cute.
Yeah.
And it's very Russian because it's like the aesthetic.
Yes.
It's not like, I don't know. It is. I kind of get that though. That it's like, okay, let's have a cartoon that represents our country rather than, like,
yeah. And it's funny because it's like adult as hell. Like the wolf is just like an alcoholic. Like it's not for kids. But it's great. Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff. There's a studio called Pilot that did like amazing little works of art. And I could start naming things, but that's not what we're doing.
You know what? I'm just gonna like plop it in for anyone who's listening on Spotify. If you want to know what we're talking about, you can check out the YouTube video and you'll see.
Yeah, like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Russian stuff is great. Yeah, there it is.
There it is. It's so
gross chest.
People would think it's hot now, so.
Oh God, yeah, totally. It's got like
Tumblr
dad
sexy
bod.
man.
Tumblr sexy. Yeah, the wolf from Nupagadi is Tumblr sexy man. God, what a statement. Anyway, yeah, Russian cartoons are great. Check them out. Hit me up on Twitter if you want to know more. Or Tay. Tay might know some things too, right?
I guess more on the book side. I haven't seen a lot of like cartoons, but I've just been like looking through like illustration a lot, and then a lot of times they just happen to be Russian or Slavic. So
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to talk to you about, and you mentioned it, is that you are autistic, and I know that a diagnosis of autism for femme people is different. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and how you kind of discovered that for yourself and, you know, what that's meant for you.
Yeah, so I arrived at this not in childhood, so a few years ago still. So relatively new discovery for me, but there are definitely things that I had been experiencing my whole life that kind of all came into focus once I had a word for them. And I have to give a big shout out to Samantha Craft's autistic profile for, I think it says for women, but I think it's just, I think of it more as like, you know, femme presenting people. And it's just a checklist meant to aid mental health professionals or therapists in detecting autistic symptoms in women or femme presenting people that might otherwise be looked over. So I saw a comic by, I believe their username is Parapylene, that was about them getting diagnosed as a femme presenting person, and that kind of rang a bell for me, just some of the stuff that she mentioned in that. I think the first thing that she mentioned was that there can be an excess of empathy rather than a lack of empathy, because the stereotype is kind of that autistic people don't have empathy, or that they can't relate to other people, which is not true, and can also be kind of leaned in the extreme. And the extreme of that, you know, is like personification of, you know, even just inanimate objects, you know, having empathy and compassion for them, or, you know, being a kid and crying because, you know, I left my favorite toy on a trip, and I'm sad not just because I lost it, but because it's stuck all alone by itself and it's never gonna.
Yeah, you give it like
I've abandoned it. Yeah, so that kind of stuff. But that comic led me to check out that whole list of other qualities, and then kind of went through those, and I was like, wow, like pretty much all of this sounds like me. And so I went through the process of talking that over with my therapist, who I've been meeting with for a long time now. So she's known me pre and post diagnosis, and was like the professional that kind of confirmed it with me. I've yet to get a psychiatrist diagnosis, and there's a few different reasons behind that. One is because I'm pretty apprehensive about going in and having a stranger tell me that I'm not autistic, and then having to reckon with that, you know, in the sense of like, if I was going in for that, a lot of times the reason people will go in for a medical diagnosis is for accommodations or for medication. So like workplace accommodations or medication, or you know, also just validation to be able to confidently say to others, you know, this is what I'm dealing with. I've been perfectly happy just with having, you know, my therapist, who's my mental health professional, confirm that with me. The other reason I'm apprehensive about doing that, not to say I won't do it in the future, but it can also just be a barrier for employment, even, or a barrier for just like unfortunately basic human rights, where if it's, you know, listed officially, you know, in a governmental sense, then it can be used against you, whether or not that's supposed to be how it works. It's how it can pan out. So that's another reason why self-diagnosis, whether or not you have, you know, a therapist like me or something like that, is a valid form of diagnosis at this point in the world, because it's so hard for a lot of people who are autistic to be diagnosed if they're femme presenting, if they're not white, if they're not, you know, a young boy. That's kind of the stereotype. So a lot of people will go through, you know, the list and carefully self-diagnose and move from there, and then kind of make the decision themselves on whether or not they want to go forward with that. So there was a big weight off of my shoulders, I think, when that so that's definitely you know, for anyone out there who is pursuing a diagnosis, self or otherwise, it's just something that's important to consider. And, you know, obviously for a lot of people, if they have more intensive needs, then that isn't really an option for them. You know, if they need medication or they need workplace adjustments, those kinds of things, then it's like, it's a little harder to go without those. So you have to kind of weigh that. But so that was a really big discovery for me, and for just a lot of both like creative things and otherwise that I've gone through in my life, just kind of made a lot more sense. I have a lot of like sensory issues, or just like a pretty limited sensory budget per day. So just kind of having more grace for myself around those things, and understanding why I might react a certain way in social situations, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's something to kind of figuring those things out that helps you understand yourself better, and then helps you deal with things better, because it doesn't feel like, it makes you feel less othered, you know, and less like unseen and unheard. So like I've been on my own journey of trying to figure that out for myself, and I think I mentioned it in Jorge's episode, who talked about his autism, which is a great episode. Everyone should check it out. But like, yeah, you know, like I've looked at lists of is it symptoms, or is there a better word for it?
Symptoms is fine, or characteristics, okay. Or
characteristics, yeah. And I've looked at a list of those, and I always wonder, like, I don't think that I'm significantly on a spectrum, but I definitely share a lot of the characteristics, and a lot of things that I used to not understand why I did it. I thought I was just awkward. Like not being able to look people in the eye sometimes. But a lot of it's also ends up being positive things, you know. It's like picking up on little like social tics, like seeing people's true selves a little more easily, because I can see through a lot of the, like, you know.
Yeah, social tics is a good way to put it. It's like I think there's also like I can't not notice some things, and that's just kind of a general issue that I run into is like I call it tagging sometimes. It's like by you know, if there's a distracting noise or like someone I know is like using a similar phrase over and over again, or just like a lot of people have like a, you know, as their fill-in phrase if they're telling a story, and then they're saying you know as kind of their, and I tag every single time that happens, whether I want to or not.
It's interesting because like I always had there's people that I would meet in life that would immediately rub me the wrong way, and I was picking up on a lot of like little microaggressions, and nobody else in my life would really see them. And I would always immediately like butt heads with those people and just not get along with them right off the bat, and nobody would believe me and they wouldn't get it. And then time went on, and all of those things that I kind of felt very early on would start to show themselves, and then everyone else would catch on that this person sucks and is really like selfish or narcissistic or whatever. And I never understood what that was, but the more I've tried to like understand my own brain and my own way of being, I've realized that it's like I notice those things because I'm like hyper aware of them, because I'm, you know, they're social tics, they're the little body language things that I'm like I'm hyper focused on, and so it's hard for me to like not notice somebody being kind of a dick, and I don't know. And so there's just little things. It's like a lot of for me, it's like hyper focus on things. I don't know. It's a complicated web of things, but that's the thing, is it's a spectrum, right? And so it's like, and I also had to realize that spectrum isn't a left to right line the way that I imagine it. It is just a big blotch of colors in every direction, you know.
Definitely. So. Yeah, and it's like there's a lot of I would say discourse right now around the way that we talk about how different people can be on the spectrum, and how they're how to talk about there used to be functioning labels that used to be, or I mean it still is a thing that a lot of people use, but there's been kind of a reconsideration of functioning labels, just in the sense that they can become like, if you're trying to say you know, a high functioning autism or low functioning autism, first of all, that sounds not great.
Rude.
Yeah, it sounds rude, and it's also like I think it suffers from making it like a lateral, just like a line again that you can be more or less of. So there's still like a conversation about how to talk about that, and you know, recognize that there are people that are autistic that have more high intensity needs, is another way it's been described, that also may struggle to like advocate for themselves because of that, or you know, if they're nonverbal, those kinds of things, that those need to be recognized as distinct from autistic, or not distinct, but just different from people who you know, are hyperlexic the other direction, you know, that are very wordy, or you know, that are hyperverbal, that's also still there. But yeah, that's been kind of interesting to unfold as well, because since I, you know, masked for most of my life, kind of without realizing it, you know, and masking is just like adjusting my behavior to appear more neurotypical, depending on the situation. Unmasking also has been a whole experience and process to just be like, am I doing this because people are expecting me to be this way, you know, or can I relax a little bit more? Can I and masking can also be a bit of it, for me, feels like performance, you know.
Yes.
I've always done very good in like formal social situations, I feel like. So I, you know, like interviews and things like that felt very structured to me. Anything that's like a one-on-one conversation with someone feels very structured to me. But in conversations with peers, or when there's, you know, 2 or 3 plus more people, and it's informal, that I have a harder time with that.
Yeah.
Because of the difference in structure. It's much easier to appear, I feel like, for me at least, it's easier to be hyperverbal and hyperlexic and present those things in like a formal or professional sense and have it come across as impressive, or like just normal or professional. But then in other, circumstances, I can just feel completely lost. And I even remember when I was interning at Nickelodeon, I had a much easier time talking to employees than I did my fellow interns, which was weird. It was weird. I like still made some really good friends from that who were also interns, but it was strange how I did kind of feel separate a lot of times from just like the banter.
Is it because like I relate to what you're saying a lot, because it feels like the banter, you have to analyze it in a way that it's like, okay, so this is how you respond to that kind of stimuli, or like there's like the rhythm and the words, and then it's like, how do I how do I play this game that doesn't have any rules that comes with it? Whereas like you say, like you're hanging out with an employee and you're like, oh, this is great, this is the kind of questions that I ask, I can use the script and I know exactly the kind of answers that they're going to give me. It is very safe, and and at the end
100%.
of this conversation we will both have gained something that makes us feel happy.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. No, you.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I met Tay when she was an intern at Nick too, and I was working on the Loud House. Vee hadn't started yet, not in house.
Not in house, yeah. I was like,
and and like you just came up and started talking to me, and like we got along really well, and we had similar interests, and it was impressive to me because a lot of the other interns that I had already met, they were following a script, and they were doing a lot of work to make themselves noticed in a way that ultimately felt artificial to me. And that's no shade on them. That's honestly just kind of what is encouraged a lot of the time.
Right.
Where you're very like structured in how you talk to employees, and I have my thoughts on that, but I'm not going to air them out here. There's good and bad things about that specific internship program, and it depends on your mileage may vary. But yeah, it was just you have no problem connecting with people when you're given sort of free reign to just be yourself. I've seen you like talk to complete strangers that I would never talk to because I'm just like, I don't want to do that. I don't know. There's no there's no fear of anything social with you, or maybe there is, but you definitely don't let it hold you back.
Yeah. It's something about I do feel very comfortable talking to like strangers a lot of the times, like strangers within like a an institution, or like I don't know. Yeah, that distinction can be interesting, because it's also like it does. I think a lot of times those things have a start and an end, whereas like hanging out in the mess hall at Nickelodeon with interns just kind of like chatting about college things, I did not. I don't feel like I knew how to do that very well. Mm-hmm. And I won't go into it too much, but like the other thing too that was like a big kind of discovery for me, or insight into myself, was that I am a very, I would say, like trusting person, and sometimes to my detriment, and especially when I was, when you're an animation student or you're trying to get in somewhere, you are kind of constantly bumping shoulders with people who are mentor figures or want to be your mentor figures, or they're just in a position of power because they're industry vets and they've been in the business for a long time, or just people who feel like they can tell younger people what to do, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in high school and then again in college, I ran into several situations where my naivety and like kind of willingness to believe that someone had good intentions kind of put me in a difficult situation. And part of that is just because of the way I care when if someone's trying to help me or take those things to heart. And so I really have like a passion for, now at this point in my life, like I want to help young artists understand what a power imbalance is, because I really didn't, and not in the starry-eyed sense of like, oh wow, this director is taking me under their wing and is gonna, they're gonna teach me everything I need to know to succeed, that sort of thing. But power dynamics in the sense too that you can be manipulated. And that there are people who are in power positions who do not have your best interests at heart. And so that was with kind of understanding how being autistic fit into that. There's some sorrow, but also just kind of some relief that at least I understand why this pattern of getting attached to like a toxic person in a power position like happened to me more than once, because for a long time it was like, why does this keep happening to me?
I think it's also just like, I think we kind of need to have some grace in the sense as like women, I guess, in the sense that like it's we're more likely to fall, just because of the gender that we were born with that we didn't pick. It's like we're more likely to fall in that situation as well. And it's like, I feel like people who are manipulative, they scope out their victims. So it's not that you're like, you or anyone who's listening, it's not that you're a person that isn't savvy. It's just that they're looking for someone that is your profile. And I think that's kind of helped me a bunch, because I relate to what you're saying. It's happened to me multiple times as well, where you're like, well, fuck my life, like why am I like, am I just a fucking idiot at this point or what? And then it's like, no, they are very savvy at what they're doing.
They weaponize kindness, or like the people like that are they're gonna find people who they can, people who are gonna let them in, which is it's their shitty characteristic, not yours. Like kindness should never be a weakness.
Which is without going too deep into it, it's finding that balance of like, okay, like I think for me it was kind of like boundaries, understanding what a boundary is.
And I feel like in entertainment it's not really boundaries are a thing that need to be re-examined in entertainment, and also when it specifically comes to young people trying to get entertainment that are more than likely to perceive someone who's experienced in the industry as like an aspirational figure, not necessarily in a bad way, but just in the sense that you can have a great admiration for someone and then they're right there in front of you, and there's a combination of goodwill but also manipulation. Like at the end of the day, they're still a human that is trying to accomplish something by their interactions with you. And if you're a student too, you don't really have much to offer in comparison. So if someone is really investing in you as an artist, then you know, and you're kind of just at the starting point where from a power perspective, you don't have a lot to offer in return. Like you just, I can't emphasize enough to just like proceed with caution.
I think it's like,
just be smart. Yeah,
you're touching on something that's kind of hard, because it's true that like in a lot of like interviews or like stories you hear like, oh, and I found my mentor. And how do you find a mentor? It's like kind of like how do you, you know, it's kind of tough because like you said, you're coming into a professional space and you're like, well, I could hopefully get that person to mentor me. And then it's like, but like you said, it's like it's still work, it's not very delimited, there's not an actual I don't know, contract or whatever, so like things get just misunderstood in a lot of like, yeah, it gets messy really fast. I guess it's safer like for women or like female identifying people to go through programs like the women animation program that has a mentorship every year, like things where it's an actual program, because then you're like, okay, like there's people I can talk
there's
to,
accountability too.
yeah,
which is important. But yeah, I mean, I've also had some really cool creative mentors or people that have taught me. I When I was in college, I took like a ZBrush crash course over the weekend, where you know they had this professional guy sculptor come in and teach all of us, and that was kind of my first time using it and stuff. And the guy really liked my what I ended up with at the end of the class, and he offered to give me lessons. And I did those with him for I think several months. He had me pick a subject that I wanted to sculpt, and then we went through that together, and like I sculpted it, and it was over like Skype or like video call. So it wasn't in person. And I always feel like the boundaries were good, you know, like there was no, you know, calling on the cell phone or kind of talking about things that weren't related to what we were doing, more than just in a tangential sense, you know. And I really learned a lot from that. And I'm really grateful to that guy, Stephen Wells, for taking the time to do that. Because also, you know, a lot of times like professionals lead busy lives, and beyond the fulfillment of, you know, teaching or helping someone, that's still taking time out of your limited time to spend with a student that, you know, might not I don't know, it just like might not work out. So I'm really grateful to him for that, and for just like, that was an example of someone that I met who, you know, like saw some promise or something and didn't overstep bounds.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is kind people out there who really do want to help, and like I think that it's like you said, just proceed with caution, because I think if somebody hears this or have heard other stories and they start worrying about everybody, you know, eventually like being shitty to them, you're gonna also like potentially screw yourself out of healthy relationships that can benefit you. So
yeah,
just be smart, keep an eye out for red flags, you know, like make smart choices.
I think at the like, because you know, like one of the things that's helped me personally was just make sure if you ever talk to if you're starting like a working relationship and you're worried that it could leave the working space, make sure you talk to your friends, reach out to someone, and get someone to like, that's what's always saved me, because when there were moments when I was like, I think I have a weird feeling about this, but I don't know, it seems benign, and like having like a couple of friends like checking the interactions, it's very important. It's I just wanted to throw in like a little bit practical tip.
I think that's good, because objectivity is better than your own perception sometimes.
Yeah,
like, it's true.
And you want to have people, you know, that are like, you know.
Yeah, and definitely when I've gotten into those situations before where manipulation started happening, it was my friends or my family that kind of helped me recognize that, or at least like expressed some concern in the way that you know, it shouldn't be a lot of times with those people, it's really like, it isn't all bad. It's this cycle of like, they will usually build you up only to tear you back down. You know, they'll say, you've got so much promise, you're going to do all these things, and then, you know, the next day see something that you worked on and be like, oh, this is high school work, and then, you know, kind of bring you back down. And that's part of the cycle of that. And if your friends see you kind of constantly going through this whirlwind of emotions with someone, like it's going to raise concern for sure.
Yeah. Tay, how do you deal with creative block when it happens to you, and what does it feel like?
I think like, honestly, I mean, even right now I'm like trying to doodle in the stream, and it is not coming to me super naturally, so I'm just returning to just drawing grass and stuff.
You're doing great.
But I came across something, I think it was post-college, that talked about periods of absorption and creation, and I feel like that's really how I function, and once again, like, just knowing that's a thing has
interesting,
provided some stability for me, or just like an explanation of what's going on. So I at least for me, how it kind of goes is, I will have like periods of very high like export, where I'm mostly drawing, mostly making stuff, you know, writing, and it just comes to me naturally. And then I have times where I'm struggling more to do I'm struggling more to do that, but in the inverse, ingesting things becomes much more like natural, or that's just kind of the flow that I went into. So a lot of times when I'm like blocked creatively, I don't really, you know, force it, especially if I don't have to. There's kind of a different conversation for like creative block for personal creative endeavors versus like if you're trying to get through something for a job. You know, you might not always have the luxury of being like, I don't feel like exporting right now, you know. But for personal stuff, I'm much more kinder with myself now, where just like I don't force it if I'm not feeling it, and I'll usually lean into absorbing just other media. So I'll be reading a lot of comics, reading a lot of books, watching more TV shows and YouTube and stuff. And a lot of times it's like my tank is empty, my creative tank is empty, and it requires outside material in order to refill it. Is kind of how I think about it. So
yeah,
I don't experience a lot of like distress anymore when I feel blocked or don't feel particularly creative, because I know that there is another solution to that, and that it's also just part of the cycle for me.
Yeah, that's true. Like knowing that things can come in cycles has been such a relief in life.
Yeah,
you know,
you get used to it. You just kind of know that that's normal.
Yeah.
There's a good talk by John Cleese of Monty Python where he talks about that and basically says the exact same thing, but he calls it like open and closed modes, where like,
ooh, yeah,
it's when you're in open mode, you're receiving, you know, you're exploring things, you're receiving ideas, you're trying things, and then when it's time to get to work, you go into closed mode, and you shouldn't let anything else in. You should just finish the thing you started. And it's a good, I think about it often, and I don't stick to it like a harsh rule, but it is something that I think it can help people to think of it that way. Because if you're always letting more ideas in, you're not going to get things done. Things aren't going to get finished. You have to scope down.
Yeah. And I also just like, I had a professor in college who would like say you have to draw every day, and I completely disagree with that.
Yeah, what the hell is that?
It's a recipe for guilt. It's just a recipe for guilt is what it is. You do not have to draw every day to get better. And even sometimes, like, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, where you've like stopped drawing for a bit and then you come back and everything feels good.
Yep.
Or you're like, oh yeah, okay, you know, this is new stuff, or there's even a little jump in in skill. I've noticed sometimes even
Oh
just a
yeah.
little bit, just from taking that time to step back. And I think if you're just like, you're hitting the bricks every single day, you're not really allowing time for what you're doing to be absorbed, you know. So
Yeah. You got to
it's more like,
process it.
maybe some people just do that naturally, and like if you just naturally kind of return to it every day, that's a thing. But if you're one of those people that's like, I don't feel capable of it every day, but I feel like I should because people tell me I should, like, you totally don't have to.
Well, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like everyone's brain is different. People have
Mm-hmm.
different ways of handling things and optimizing, and so like do what works for you. I've talked about it probably plenty of times, but like yeah, I don't really sketch anymore. I if I'm doodling, other than on the show, which I do less and less, it's towards a practical thing, like a project that I'm concepting or something. But um, yeah, you know, V here loves to doodle.
Yeah,
It seems like that helps you process things, V.
I don't know. It's
No?
just that I really like doing it. I don't know. I just like
Okay.
doodling. But I think for getting back to the like drawing every day, I think the only thing I could say, hopefully, if that helps anyone, is that like sometimes you it might help take the pressure off instead of and the way that I say this is like drawing every day doesn't mean you have to draw something good every day.
Yeah.
It's just building the habit, as in like the way that I imagine it, like the way that for me has that advice has worked was like and it's not trying to guilt anyone, it's just like I'm trying to kind of like shed some light on how it could work for someone, like because I used to be very worried about drawing something bad, and there was like when I was in college where I was like, oh, I can't draw anything because everything I do is bad. But then if you're like, well, I'm gonna draw a little bit every day, it doesn't have to be fantastic, it can just be like a little tiny thing, then slowly kind of takes the pressure off of like, oh yeah, it's just a thing that I it's just a habit, and then it becomes, so that's just like a another way to look at it. Because I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like drawing is, sometimes people are like, oh, you should draw, it's like very, that's a lot of pressure, because then you're like, well, what should I draw, what should I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if it's like, yeah, like I don't
That's
know.
true.
That's with a lot of labor too. Like, humans aren't just like a fountain of
Yeah.
consistent anything really, but
Yeah.
consistent work specifically, or consistent output. You know, those things are always gonna
Exactly.
change and adjust. It's just like, yeah, having grace for
Yeah.
yourself in those situations. I even remember, I think someone asked Miyazaki once, like, what he does when he is art blocked, and he just like shrugged. He was like, I don't know, just wait for it to end, like, you know. So it's like everyone has different solutions to it, but
Totally.
I always kind of go back to just like ingesting media that feels comforting or that feels
Yeah.
inspiring, and that will usually, like, if I just let it be, will come back around, and then, you know, I'll be drawing again. But
Yeah.
just taking a lot of the pressure off to think of it more that way.
For sure.
Yeah.
We had a lot of really good questions come in. First, I'm going to go through questions we got on our Discord. If you're a patron, you get access to our Discord. It's a real good community of folks, and it helps us out a lot. So check out our Patreon. From user Brother to Drummer, Taylor, what is your ideal work environment? Silence, music, bright and cheery, dark and isolated?
Oh yeah. It depends on what I'm working on, but my office, usually I'm not like a dark person. When I was working in VFX, like the first studio I worked at, we were in like an annex that was completely dark, like kind of by, I think, the preference of the other artists in there. But it was extremely draining and depressing, and I didn't like it. So I like having some natural light, and depending on what I'm working on, if it's animation and there's nothing like verbal happening, then, you know, I'll usually put on like music or a video, or something to listen to. But if it is like verbal or requires like the processing of audio or dialogue, then that usually doesn't go. And then I'll do something like very instrumental and non-intrusive. But yeah, I work from home right now, which feels like kind of the ideal for me, and that like I have a lot of freedom over just like making sure um, my sensory stuff is all good to go. You know, my room is kind of tuned to how I want things to be. Yeah, so that's kind of what comes to mind first. I also just like take a good amount of breaks. I'll like go outside and sit out on the porch because I'm at home. Those kinds of things. I think in the future, if I was ever in a situation where I could do like hybrid, or I had like the option to come in, that would be cool. But for me, with a lot of stuff shutting down, it was nice to kind of discover that I could be a bit more comfortable at home. And actually, when I started working on OFK, that was a remote job before the pandemic happened. So the transition there was relatively easy. But for me, just like having control over my environment is pretty important. And I also just with my allergies and like sensory stuff, sometimes I just need to tap out for a bit. And it is a lot easier and less like shameful to do that when you're at home compared to, like working in VFX. I felt, guilty for even just stepping away for a moment to go sit on the couch if my hands were hurting or I had eye strain or those sorts of things, because just no one else did that. Like you took your half an hour break and that was it. So
yeah,
VFX also sounds just super rough.
Oh yeah, could not. I do not recommend.
1 star.
1 star. Yeah, I'm sure there's. I mean, like there are studios that are pretty cool, but yeah, there's VFX is suffering from a lot of the similar things that other non-unionized industries are suffering from, quality of life and those things. So that was kind of another reason I got interested in moving into games. Games also doesn't get the best rep for quality of life either, but at least I feel like there's a bit more progress towards making things more better. We're getting there.
More of a push for sure.
Yeah, and the team that I came onto was for OFK was very I think what's the word for it? Like self-care oriented doesn't sound quite right, but very much just about like, if you need to take time for you, or you're like, I never felt bad for, not that it happened very often, but the couple of times where I was like, having a bad mental health day, being able to say that and not having to give like a bullshit reason for it, that in itself would be taken seriously as a reason that someone might need to step away. That was very nice.
Yeah. Discord member Joe Benson asked, any children's tales from childhood you'd like to make into a movie?
Ooh.
These are good questions.
Well, maybe not a movie, but I've always kind of wanted to try, even just for my own fun, doing a graphic novel adaptation of The We Free Men by Terry Pratchett. It was the first Terry Pratchett book that I read when I was a kid, and it's probably my favorite book of all time. But I can see it very clearly in my head, and kind of in addition to that, because Terry was kind of familiar with the world of video games, there are parts of that book specifically that echo video gamey sort of things. Like there's a fantasy world in it where like literally like the draw distance of the world is changing, or like when she looks at stuff, because it's kind of a created world, she'll stare at a tree, and as she's looking at the tree, the bark will become more realistic, and it'll,
interesting,
kind of grow in, and the details in the distance would be fuzzy, that kind of stuff. And so it's always kind of, I've always wanted to, at least like just even for fun, like a chapter or something, just to try to visualize some of that. There's a very good illustrated version of the book. I think I have it downstairs actually, but that I also love. But I do think it'd be really fun to try to translate that over. That's probably the first one that comes to mind. And then there's also this childhood book that I read called The Music of Dolphins, that is about it's like loosely based off of someone who was actually discovered out in the wild, but basically this girl who has been living by herself out in nature, kind of in the shallows, in a community with this group of dolphins, and then she gets rescued and kind of rehabilitated, and it's based off of a lot of like, stories of quote feral children, or children that never formed, personal skills or verbal skills or those kinds of things because they were deprived of that. But the chapter book is really cool because as she learns to write, she gets more verbose, so it's very kind of basic at the beginning, and then just kind of gets she gets more and more able to express herself, and that's another one that's come to mind over time that I just like
yeah,
it would be cool to try to visualize that, and I also just related a lot to her when I was younger. Just got like a very kind of sensory connection to water, and I don't know, like it wasn't necessarily about an autistic child, but I feel like a lot of the like disorientation that she feels, I related to a lot, so I've always kind of wanted to come back and revisit that.
Very cool. Hopping over to Twitter questions from @the Rob Robber. Got it. How does the pipeline for video game animation differ from traditional studio animation?
Well, from the little bit that I've done, I haven't done any like what's it called, like feature animation for anything, and what it has seemed like to me from that process is that it's a very long process and a lot of like iteration. You might be working on a shot for a very long time, in comparison to with games or with VFX. VFX, you might just be working on something and then submitting it the next day, depending on the complexity of it. Because it's a lot of times like animation that I did for VFX and stuff like that is kind of like a baseline that more like compositing or other things are being put on top of, and so it's a lot more like impromptu. And then for games, I for OFK, we had this big show basically worth like episodes worth of 5 episodes of dialogue and character acting for these characters to be doing in an indie game that doesn't have a full animation team. So like one of the first things that Teddy, the director, and I tried to figure out was how to go about approaching that, getting animation for all of these characters, for all of these things, knowing that it can't all be bespoke. There's going to have to be reused animations. And so I think that's a distinction or a basic distinction between animations made for feature or for other things versus for games, is that they might need to be reused if they're not cutscene animations. Also, both in VFX and video games, there's a lot more like use of motion capture, and cleaning up motion capture, because pretty much all mocap needs to be cleaned up, whatever they tell you. That it doesn't. It absolutely does. And you know, when Andy Serkis says that all of his he was the total performance of Golem, and that, you know, the animators just clean stuff up. It's like,
fuck off.
Yeah, fuck off. That is not how it goes. So there's a lot of kind of even artistry to that. But for OFK, we ended up building a like acting library is how we did it. So we had for each character there would be base poses, and then in the timeline in Unity we would build on top of the additive system that you could do with layers in the timeline. So we would have the base pose that the character was standing in, and then I started kind of calling out elements that would make them feel more alive. So we added a breathing loop that would just kind of run in the background and then would be interrupted when the character is talking. We added blinking and a look at system so that we could control where the character was looking, but there could also be like a variance to it. So you could say within this range, I want the character to kind of dart their eyes around at this frequency. We could control that, which was really interesting because you get a unique result every time the game plays. They're still looking within this certain range that you've specified, but where they specifically choose to look within that range is random each time you play the scene, which is really cool. It's very different from feature animation where, you know, like you are kind of coordinating every single look and blink and keying those things in. And then on top of that, we would do the acting, which would be we would do like held gestures, or I think I called them position changes at the time, but I like held gestures better now. But gestures and held gestures, gestures being something like a shrug that just plays once and then finishes, versus like a held gesture, which would be something like leaning forward. You would then have to call for the character to lean back. So the combination of all of those things came together to create like the acting for this, and that felt like a very, very different experience than hand keying something that is going to be kind of bespoke and on its own. And it was also just very interesting to kind of like piece together and see how far we could get just with that, you know, and then fill in the gaps for more specific body motions or things like that with, you know, bespoke animations. But the first step was how far can we get with the things that we've already built?
Man, that's very involved.
Yeah.
That's animation for games is so much more technical, as I have also learned working in games again.
Yeah, and like I still feel like I'm only scraping the surface of it, you know.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, I feel like it is really interesting kind of if you're like an animator looking at what kind of things you'd like to do, or like good questions to ask is, you know, just like how long generally do I want to spend on things before they're sent off? Do I want to create these very bespoke, you know, acting or action animations, or you know, is there a niche more in like acting? I really enjoy like acting. I feel like in that respect of like it became like choreography, because then the scene would be laid out and I would go through it and time all of these kind of parameters that we built to match, and the look at, I think, really, really sold it. Just the fact that the character would blink and look around, and kind of just organically do that, added so much to the scenes. And then also with all of those, it depends, but with all of those projects I've been on, besides the Radiohead one, because there wasn't any mouths in that, but then also for OFK we did like phonemes, which is like mouth shapes, and then those would be run through a plugin that would take the audio of the voice actor and translate it into the phonemes that were being said. So ah, ooh, consonant noises, all of that. and then me and our one of our 3D tech artists, Jane, would go through and clean up all of those. So it was a really cool process, and you know, if we ever get to do like a season 2 or anything, there are definitely things that I would continue to like refine, or that I'm interested in figuring out. There's still stuff that we never quite figured out that I think would plus that process even more.
Very cool. From @Shackleback, what is your least favorite step in the animation process, rigging and skin weights included?
Well, luckily, these past few jobs I've been on, I've had very competent tech artists to handle the more rigging side of things and weight painting and all of that, because while I know how to do it, that's definitely not my bag as much. But for animation, I feel like going from blocking to spline is always painful for me. Going from, especially if it's like going from stepped to then, okay, turning on, we're no longer looking at this animation in stepped view. We're seeing it with the default splines that the 3D program is generating, and then suddenly it can just look like muddy and ugly and gross. And then you got to go through and kind of refine all of those tangents to get through that. And depending on how like detailed of a block in you do, some of that can be like mitigated in the process, but it's still, I think that's the weirdest thing with 3D animation, is that you can just like scoot things around, you know, in a way that you can't with 2D. You know, you can adjust a hand or adjust a hip or those things, but with that freedom also comes kind of like, there are so many possible solutions to making this thing look better.
You can tinker.
And so like with that stuff, I feel like just having even that's what you know, like feedback and having a second eye on it is good for too, because like when you've been staring at something for long enough, it can become like really hard to tell if it's landing or not, or if you see a hitch in something but you can't quite articulate it, usually someone else can point it out in a different way.
We had a couple questions from @TimLevang. He asked, did you meet Tom York or anyone else from Radiohead? And if so, what were they like?
Yes, I met them all. No.
That would have been great.
It would have been cool. I mean, I've worked on a few different things that were with like music artists for my VFX job as well. And I would say mostly for these projects that are for a musician or like a big figure like that, unless you're like the director or kind of one of the creative leaders of the project. Like if you're just an artist working on the project, unless there's some special reason for the property holders to speak with you directly, you're not going to meet those people. And that's
highly unlikely.
Yeah, it's highly unlikely. It's cool if it happens, but it's definitely not like anticipated. So even so, you know, with the Radiohead project, it was cool, you know, those moments where you know, our director and producers and those people did get to you know, interface with the band. I think they even flew out to the UK to go over some stuff with them and show it to them in person, and just getting even to hear about that secondhand, you know, what their thoughts were on it, those kinds of things was really cool. And yeah, and then also I on that project I did like a little doodle at the end of the year when I finished it of one of the characters in the game, and then Stanley Donwood, who does all their like visual art and stuff like that, reposted it on his account, and that was cool. It was cooler once he credited me, but
well, yeah.
But still, it's just like there is something really special about making something, and in that case, you know, with some of the VFX stuff, and you're making a music video for someone like Maroon 5 or something like that, you're never going to hear what Adam Levine thinks about the Maroon 5 music video that you made for them. That's probably, they probably, you know, filmed that months down the line from that, and you know,
Yep.
it's very, very separated. And also a lot of times too, there's like a what's like a creative liaison, you know, like a creative director or something for I can't remember his name, but that's how it was for the Radiohead project. There was like, they had a creative director, and then we had a creative director, and it was kind of like the two of them were interfacing with the band and then interfacing with us, and like uh you know, that's how we got our feedback and all of those things. But still, it was impressive with the Radiohead project because that is definitely on the more involved side, in a good way, of like the band actually looking at the thing as it's being made and having thoughts on it, and helping to shape that. So that was really cool.
Yeah. It's rare that a band is going to be involved in any side projects like that, I think, because like it's just a lot of work to be in a band. And so like
Yeah.
those things are generally outsourced and maybe done with trusted collaborators, but like they're not
Yeah,
going to be.
exactly. But still very special.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And then the follow up was: is it possible for a normal person to make a good video game alone, or is that just something that some special people do?
Oh man.
What is
I
normal?
guess it's yeah, define normal and special. But I mean, it seems like, I mean, it's absolutely possible to make a video game by yourself. And like, I know people who have done it. The biggest defining factors for yourself in deciding if you can do that or not is like scope and pace. So like, if you just want to like pick away at making something, you know, over the course of months, and do it that way, that is totally plausible. And then too, with
Mm-hmm.
scale, you know, if you're trying to make like a open world, you know, multiplayer sort of thing, you know, or something that is closer to like you're reaching for the stars, you know, AAA sort of stuff, then that's going to be very overwhelming. But if you like really define your scope to what's doable for you, and you're okay with it happening over a long period of time between the rest of your life, I feel like it's very achievable. It's actually never been more achievable, I feel like, as far as just the amount of like free tools that are available to make games, and tutorials and those kinds of things. I mean, compared to, you know, the early days of games, like those resources are really easy to come by now. And that's exciting because it is, there's a lot of ways to make a game, even if you don't want to be in engine. um, you know, there are other tools, and other like systems that people have made, you know, like RPG Maker, that kind of stuff, that handles some of the framework for you. And then also like something that I want to like learn about more, or I think is really interesting, is like bespoke tabletop like role playing games. Um, there are a lot of just like handmade, handwritten ones that people have made on itch.io, that, you know, once again, if you don't want to make something that's digital necessarily, but you still want to make a game, that is another you know, avenue to kind of look into and be like, okay, like, does this need to be a digital game? Could this be, you know, a role playing experience in another aspect, or could, you know, art be involved in it in a different way? So yeah, I mean, it's still, I think it takes a certain kind of person to stick with something like that long. And it's, I've had ideas for games that I wanted to make, and a lot of times the biggest thing stopping me is just continuing with it, and continuing with the troubleshooting process on your own. So yeah, that's my big
Yeah.
long thought on that.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
It's
I
just
think
like
it's very good.
making the commitment, right? Like making like your own schedule and like sticking to it. That's like, yeah, the hardest
Yeah, and
part.
like some
Yeah.
people do it. They absolutely do. But yeah, I feel like just the games that I've seen that have been made by one person and have been successful have had a very well-honed sense of scope, I would say.
Yeah.
Scope is huge, and we've talked about it before, like finishing small projects rather than trying to do one big one, because chances are you're not going to finish the big one. And it goes back to the previous things we talked about, like the open and closed modes, where it's like you just have to do the thing. So sometimes you have to just finish the thing. You can't always be experimenting. But yeah, from last but not least, from @Alabaster Indigo, OMG hi Tay. How do you feel about the lack of good autistic representation in kids television?
Well, it's interesting because I will say, to preface this, that I'm very behind on watching like more recent kids television, and I know that there have been not necessarily it's like explicit representation, but at least characters that have like fallen into that, or that people have enjoyed as like autistic headcanons. And I feel like a lot of autistic people and autistic creatives find characters that, even if they're not explicitly labeled that way, that they relate to, and they can kind of build that headcanon around. And I feel like that's the majority of it. There besides like the was it Sesame Street, I think, has like one of their characters is explicitly autistic, but like I literally can't think of another besides that, or even as like a person who used to watch The Office religiously and have kind of moved on to a new part of my life. This isn't kids entertainment, but I look back on, how Dwight Schrute or even Michael Scott kind of are portrayed, specifically, Dwight more so as a kind of neurodivergent person who struggles in social interactions with people, and like when are the times that that's actually funny, and when are the times that it's maybe not really so much, but it's being played for a laugh, or it's just like, isn't he so wacky, like that. That is less clever, I would say. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like that's the majority of my answer, is that people just kind of like search those characters out themselves. And then I know there are also, tons of, created characters for that people have just made themselves that are those things. But as far as like things that are put onto TV or into comics or those kinds of things, the pickings are slim. So like I have some like autistic headcanons of characters that I like to think of that way. But yeah, beyond that, you just have to create it yourself. It's interesting. I always kind of related to SpongeBob when I was a kid.
Interesting.
Because and that's the thing, is like it's this is supposed to be a goofy, quirky cartoon character that's kind of ridiculous sometimes. But there are a lot of things about SpongeBob that, like, I feel like other people would laugh at, and I would kind of like relate to, just like being a crybaby, or, when he throws a party and he's so focused on everyone following the schedule and routine, and just like trying to control what everyone's doing, just like kind of being more sensitive and sincere than everyone else around you, like those sorts of things. And I feel like that in itself was really endearing to me, because I was a sensitive crybaby kid. I would care, I don't know, very like sincerely about things, or just kind of like take stuff too seriously sometimes. And that like juxtaposition there is interesting. I also feel like, there's not that many, like, in order for those characters to exist too, a lot of times, like, hopefully they don't have to be, but It'd be nice if they're created by other autistic people. So in order for that to even happen in the first place, you know, those people have to be in positions where they can introduce those characters and have them approved and stay and all of those things. So it's rough out there.
It's rough out there, and
I was just gonna say, I think it could also be tricky with companies labeling a character as autistic, just because they might run into, like, it's not legal, but like then they have to like hire a consultant, and then
it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's
I think it's like that's a big reason why it might not like companies shy away from it. It's because of all the like
yeah
yeah
unrelated to unrelated to any kind of neurodivergency, but like even just trying to get a non-binary character picked up by a major network. I had some conversations, man, and like it's fucking frustrating, and I don't think people that complain too much, and especially when they blame creators for not having the perfect representation, you don't know what the fuck people are up against, man. Like it's hard to get anything that's not completely vanilla standard, you know. Like it's really difficult to get any executives to understand, much less support, and you're gonna end up having to filter it through a whole like myriad of checks and balances and you know, people. And so it's I'm glad that there's like little bits of pieces coming through and little bits of representation. It's only gonna get better. But I wish people would cut artists some slack, because they're all trying their best. Like a lot of people in positions of, you know, creative control or power or whatever, a lot of them are trying their best, but it's just constant pushback. So it's tough out there.
I mean, like I feel like you know, for looking for those things, I have enjoyed kind of like you have to find other avenues to enjoy them. And I feel like for me, you know, for queer representation, or also just like, you know, neurodivergent characters or characters with mental health issues, those kinds of things, like a lot of things that, you know, like it's evidenced by, you know, your work too, Gene, but a lot of those things I find now more in like webcomics and like just individually published things that don't have the stakes of a network or a studio behind them. Like there's basically no one to tell you, no, your character can't be that way.
And that's where things start too, right? Like there's a benefit to things being IP driven, and there's very few of those. There's very few benefits, because it is obnoxious how everything's all about IP right now. But if you have a strong enough independent thing that does well, it could very well lead to a shortcut to that representation being in a major thing. You look at something like Dead End, and that is a trans male main character, and now it's in a kids cartoon that is on Netflix, you know, and it's like, but that was just what Hamish wanted to do,
right?
And now it's a big thing. So it's like you gotta just do it yourself, like we've said a million times. You gotta just make the stories you want to tell, and then hope they reach that audience. And
well, and I was just gonna say, like I've basically been creating autistic characters my whole life without realizing it. And I had this really weird realization kind of around when I was first figuring stuff out. I had just finished like writing a like middle grade fantasy book that I was going to query around. And I realized after writing it that the main character was autistic, and a lot of the things that I was describing her struggling with came from that. And just how strange, you know, like for one, you know, first of all, to experience that in your own life and then realize it too, and then look back on, you know, seeing someone that you've created, that you've kind of manufactured these struggles for, or this, you know, personality for, and seeing that reflected there. So it's like, even if you're not trying, I feel like whatever, those things kind of come out of in the work, whether you realize it or not.
Oh yeah. Yeah, people write what they know.
Yeah. So I have a lot more, I think, compassion for that character now too, because at the time, I think I didn't understand her, you know, and you know, people who would read it for me wouldn't understand her, and I think part of that just came from her. You know, that the solution wasn't necessarily that, oh well, now that you know that in the book, like, she needs to say that she's that and that's what it is, but it more just came from like, I was writing a phenomenon without having it named in my head, and just the power of being like, okay, yeah, that's what this character is dealing with, and this is how those things will manifest, is really cool to flesh out.
That's awesome. Tay, what are your goals for the future, either career-wise or in life?
I feel like I've been putting off doing like autobio comics and like personal comics and illustrations for quite a while. Like, there's always things that like creep out of me regardless, you know, like I'll always be like doodling, or if something really strikes my fancy to like make an illustration of, I'll make it. But I kind of want to make a concerted effort in the future to just like make more narrative work again. I put a lot of work into that that book I mentioned, you know, that it didn't really go anywhere, but you know, it was also my first chapter thing that I completely finished. So, you know, had very high standards for myself of like, this is the first thing that you finished, and it has to, you know, make it through all of these hoops and stuff. Now I'm just really proud of myself for finishing it. So I just kind of want to continue to go with that stuff. I've always been really inspired by Emily Carroll's HTML comics that are meant for being viewed in web, and kind of take advantage of, you know, the fact that you can hover over panels and they can change, or just like playing with the structure, or, you know, clicking to advance and then you're on a new page with a new structure, those kinds of things. So I just want to play around a lot more with all of that, and with sequential art.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what's on the forecast. We'll see.
That all sounds amazing. Well, that's the end of this creative block. Taylor, thanks for being our guest and sharing your story.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
And thanks to your listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, and Malik for helping us produce the show.
If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, Gene.
And I was Vee. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.